Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. We are chatting about the world of B2B and B2C marketing. So let's start with a quick definition about the topic and what we will revise today. So at first, it sounds simple. B2B sells to businesses, B2C sells to people. But when we dig deeper, it's clear that B2B is also reaching to individuals, right? And in B2B, you might be using your company's money, but a bad decision could impact your job. So there's still a lot of at stake. So emotions play a big role too in B2C. It's about personal feelings like comfort or excitement. Think about car ads that talk about adventure or style. And on the other hand, B2B focuses on worries like making a mistake or not achieving results. So there is a lot of change happening, and B2B is starting to use more positive emotions like B2C does. And also, if you're buying something for your company, you want the process to be as easy as when you shop for yourself, like when you shop on Amazon. So your buyer journey is not competing with your competitors, it's competing with Amazon. So we've got a packed agenda, and we will dive into these topics and see how B2B can learn from B2C marketing. And so today we have great guests today here with us. So let's start with a quick introduction. Tom, would you like to start first?
Thank you. My name's Tom. I'm the Chief Executive and Founder of AdsAct.
Thank you, Tom. Colin?
Yeah, my name is Colin O'Shea. I've been working in marketing and related areas for 15 plus years. The past couple of years, I've been with Forrester and BCG.
Thank you. Elliot?
Howdy, Elliot Wood, currently performance lead at Digitas under Publicis, but actually moving to a client director role at a publisher side soon. So getting to see both sides of the coin.
Brilliant. And John?
Hi, my name is John. I am Senior Creative Writer at DLA Piper, which is a global law firm. I'm a lawyer by background, but I moved into writing and editorial and content a while ago. So I work on all sorts of brand messaging and different kinds of communications projects here at the firm.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, and I'm Joaquin Dominguez. I'm head of marketing here at SACT, and I have a background in B2C marketing. I used to be brand manager for Casillero del Diablo, the wine brand. Then I transitioned into B2B marketing for a technology startup. So let's kick off our discussion today. We will dive into the evolutionary gap between B2B and B2C marketing. And many people believe B2B is always behind B2C. But what's causing this gap? Or let's address the elephant in the room and let's see why B2B is so boring or too practical or too focused on short-term results. What do you think?
Who's going to start, right?
Please.
Ultimately, I think historically B2B has been more or less bland because it's just golf days and publisher trade press and things like that are going very specific target audience. And I think it's from a technical side of point, there's just less data. Like there's just, you've only got 10 target customers or 100 target customers, as opposed to B2C, you've got thousands, millions, tens of millions. And realistically, you can't optimize with that. But I also think it's the opposite, that it was in the notes you shared, was the level of information about each customer can be so much deeper, whether from the actual company's perspective or the individual you're engaging with. And there is like all the data privacy of B2C, basically none of it exists. You can, in a choice of better word, stalk your potential client and understand every single thing about them, their LinkedIn, their Instagrams, and really understand, cool, if I need to close this deal, you understand the business objective of increase sales, decrease costs, whatever the thing is. But also on a personal level, you can get super deep with the person you're trying to woo to be a business partner or whatnot.
Yeah, because the value is so much greater in the transaction. So so an account-based marketing, as you say, allows you to, without gathering personally identifiable information, you could be so much more personalized per potential purchaser.
Yeah, 100%.
Exactly, and I think it's totally acceptable as well. Targeting a company's culture, for example, you want to target a company that is interested in sustainability.
Yeah.
Whereas targeting people is more nuanced, right? Because how did you obtain their data? What you mentioned before, it's much more nuanced, and sometimes it's like a dream for a marketer having all this information in front of you.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a side tangent, but there's a great book called The New Gold Standard. It's about the Ritz-Carlton, and coincidentally, we do business with the Marriott hotel chain who owns the Ritz-Carlton, and they have a dossier on every single customer that has ever stayed with them at the Ritz-Carlton. So do you like red apples or green apples? Do you like the New York Times or the LA Times or whatever it is? And I know that's a B2C product, but it's such B2B mindset, and I think it's tremendous that other people can utilize.
I definitely think we should talk about luxury. I think, Colm, you had a perspective on you're comparing Louis Vuitton's approach, the luxury approach with a B2B approach. I think there's definitely things that B2B marketers can learn from luxury. And that's a really good example, Elliot, that in a B2B world would be called ABM marketing. But in B2B, ABM is relatively new. And I think most B2B companies don't tend to do very, very detailed personalization of digital marketing. But clearly the Ritz has been doing it for, 400 years.
Yeah, on the personalization piece, and I'm harking back to my time at Forrester here, that was really a key thing, especially in B2C around 4 years ago, I would say, when we were doing a lot of work with clients. Primarily at the time, we did it in both B2B and B2C, but primarily in B2C. And obviously there was a lot of focus on customer journeys at that time also. And bringing it forward now a couple of years, I don't think that was ever dealt with very much in the B2B side of things, I would say. But certainly within the luxury retail, Marriott, who I also had some dealings with, it was totally key at that time to focus on personalization. Of course, all of these houses of brands, as some of these are, including Marriott, would have their different tiers of targets that they go after, and then they personalize based on that. On the B2B side of the house, that was not at that time a conversation that I would have with some of the bigger clients that I had in that space, which would have been more in telco, for example. In pharma, we weren't really discussing personalization in that point. And then 2 points, about 2 years after that, I would say it switched more into maximization of data. This was during the pandemic. The personalization piece was kind of thought to have been done in those B2C companies. And if it hadn't, they were definitely laggards. Where B2B companies were in that regard, then I don't know, I'm open to you guys giving what your opinions are on that, but that was where we saw the work coming from in personalization, I would say 3 to 4 years ago.
I think a company that's been selling to really massive organizations for a long, long time in B2B is likely to have a similar sort of Ritz-Carlton style mindset, but a lot of that personalization is basically done by people like the salesperson, the account managers, being there managing the Dell account for 5 years, 10 years. They know everything about all the buyers, and they're probably doing that reasonably well. But I think the big gap is in when you're selling to mid-sized companies or smaller companies, you have this real, I think, because Elliot, you said at the beginning, you can be more creative and interesting in your marketing, more personalized, if you have information about your audience to put color on them.
Yeah.
But if you don't, then you'll stop being boring. And I think that a lot of businesses that are targeting, well, if you're targeting like massive organizations, you don't tend to target them with extensive digital lead gen campaigns because you know them all personally. But when you're targeting, potentially millions of small businesses, the information on them tends to be really, really poor, and therefore the marketing tends to be quite boring.
I think also because there's so much brand safety elements to B2B marketing, I've seen a few, and I've got an example. I know asked to prepare a few for the call, is what everyone's people, like a business doesn't exist. It's not real. It's just a collection of people and some IP and a few lawyers. And ultimately, yes, the customer is the business of whatever you're selling, software or something, but it is an actual human you need to convince to buy your thing, and they need to put their reputation online or their personal values or whatever to actually go, cool, I look at this, my boss is going to be proud of me and I'm going to be proud of my decision. And I feel that the boring side of it, in one of the examples that I don't even want to share it now, if there's a segment for that, is there's a lot more fun stuff happening. That is, yes, I know you need to have a professional conversation over on the left, but we're actually going to have a more exciting human-to-human conversation, even if it's one-way advertising, of the way I'm trying to communicate to you. And you go, that was interesting. That was fun. Maybe I should actually fill out a lead form or pick up the phone or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you hear a lot about the differences between B2B and B2C. So obviously I'm coming at it from a content and a writing perspective, and the messaging perspective. I don't think the differences are as great as many people would have it. A lot of this stuff will be, if you're writing for a business, it's got to be formal, it's got to be long words, it's got to be complex, it's got to be technical. But what you just said there, Elliot, is I think the key to it, which is that we're always, at least for now, right, until the AIs take over the world, we are writing for other human beings. So what I'm most concerned with when I'm working on messaging or brand building or content or any kind of advertising, whatever, is how do we as human beings process information? How do we take that information? How do we process that? How do we pass that information? And how do we act on that information? And that's not just about information that goes to your head, it's also about how you feel. And so I think a lot of B2B organizations, or many B2B organizations, kind of miss that, and we confine ourselves in these boxes of formality, but they're self-imposed. They don't need to be there. As long as you're not being silly, as long as you're not saying anything offensive, as long as you're not going to get your brand into trouble, legally, or some risk perspectives, you've got a long way that you can go before you get to those places. And you can get your copy or your content or your messaging into a much more audience-centric human place by freeing yourself of those shackles of what we perceive business writing or business messaging needs to be.
Yeah, I think in general in Europe, and actually I'll put Australia in that as well, we're not very good at it. In the States, I think they make really good B2B ads. They're fun, they're exciting. I watch a lot of F1, and a lot of the sponsors are now B2B this season. Who's at Amazon and Workday. So it's like, yeah, I'm never actually going to use that as a person, but if I have to do a job, great. And they're actually really fun ads. And you're like, okay, nice, this is good. But again, they're US based. So I don't know if there's a cultural difference there as well.
I think there is. Having worked quite a lot with US companies too, I think they can get away, and feel free to disagree with me on this, to what we in English-speaking Europe, let's say, would describe as exaggerated wording. That was my opinion in terms of their ads, that some of the stuff that the grandiose statements that they might use in the States might not wash as well over here.
But maybe that
Certainly.
also that kind of freedom also gives you a bit more ability to create more creative, more interesting ads, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely does. And it sounds obvious, but people like fun things. People like having fun. People like reading things that are enjoyable. B2B stuff tends to be very heavy on the information side. It's very informative. It's got a lot of description, a lot of nouns, a lot of detail in it. But we as human beings, we don't change, like the writing techniques and how we process information doesn't just change at 9 o'clock in the morning when we just start work and we're like, oh, now I'm a completely different human being and I'm going to take this information because I'm working for a business rather than a consumer. We don't work like that. We're the same people. And all of the research that I've seen, and there's been some done specifically on, you know, what clients of law firms prefer in terms of audience, you know, perception of their messaging. It's all relevant for any kind of writing. And yeah, you probably can't get away with being quite so informal in some ways, right? As if you've got a consumer brand and you've got a very jokey, self-referential brand, then maybe that's not going to work for a big serious organizations that's doing some, you know, serious things. But that doesn't mean that you can't have some fun. It doesn't mean that it can't be relatively informal and relaxed and conversational, because that's how we as human beings react to stuff. And the audience is the only thing that really matters. Like if I write something that my manager, you know, loves, but my audience hates, I've failed. You know,
it's about creating a brand personality, right? And that involves a long-term commitment. You don't invest in a brand for 1 year, for one campaign. You need to invest thinking about the next 10 years or 20 years. And maybe you, Colin, you have, in your experience at Forrester, you advised a lot of B2B CMOs. And so how can B2B marketers can put more emphasis on that brand building and long-term commitment? I don't know if you gave them some advice on that area.
It tended to be was very much actually focused on internal B2B marketing within big organizations. I think one thing at the time, this is again probably 2 to 3 years ago, that especially we were emphasizing on the B2C side was the value of emotions, and that is often lacking in B2B, even if it's an internal B2B messaging. I'm thinking of typical B2B messages you get even within a bigger organization. They can be very formal, like you mentioned, and lack an emotive tone. And I think that was kind of one area where they might, to the point of lightening the messaging somewhat, that was an area that was not really touched on much with the B2B companies at that time, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be
and that's critical, because I went to see my doctor the other day, you know, consultant, and he was saying, we were having a chat because I've known him for a while, and he said, I said, have you got a website yet? You know, have you got your website set up? And he said, no, I really need to do that. He said, what do I put on it? He says, you know, and he said, I've got my expertise, I've got, you know, the operations that I do, all of that. And I said, yeah, but think about what you're really selling. And he was like, yeah, I'm selling my expertise. And I said, yeah, you're also selling that, but what you're really selling is trust. You're selling safety. You're selling reassurance. You're selling hope, ultimately, to people that you're going to be able to fix their problems, and they're going to have a good life, you know. And so it's, yeah, you're selling products and services, you may be, but you're also selling other things. And as a law firm, we sell that too. We sell security, we sell confidence, we sell, you know, success. We want our clients, we want to help them succeed. Yeah, we do that through legal solutions and other things and advice, but it's more than just the facts. It's also, like you say there, the emotions.
Which I think companies had to really emphasize, and they were forced into doing, like you just mentioned, emphasizing these positive elements and these secure elements during the pandemic. Whether they've actually continued to that now 2 years later is a different point.
Just on that one, I am still annoyed that no alcohol company during the pandemic, because there was heaps of ads on, I was in Australia during the pandemic, none of them just went, this sucks, have a beer. They were all like, oh, we're with you. And I'm like, guys, just say what we're all thinking. It's, yeah, sorry, it's a side tangent.
No, it's that's the thing. And I just, yeah, be plain speaking, tell your audience, you know, what they want to hear. If that matches up with what you want to tell them, that's where you get the engagement, right? But there is this thing of authenticity. But I think a lot of people, and, you know, I'm not talking about my business here, but, you know, generally in sort of business, you know, sort of marketing and messaging, they kind of feel that it needs somehow to be more like that longer words and the longer paragraphs and complex words are somehow more sophisticated, and
will make people trust it more.
Yeah, and that's more the done thing. And it's usually because that's how they learned from the person who learned before them, and they're just working from templates and the way it was done. And we just have to break free of that and think, well, when we're not at work, Do we enjoy reading business writing? Generally, we don't, right? It's not fun. It's not that interesting. It's not that exciting. So, you know, I think you've got to go as whatever you need to do to engage your audience is what you should do. And obviously that does come with understanding your audience, as Ella and Thomas, as you've said before. But we have to start getting people, you know, I think people have to start getting comfortable with the process of going outside their comfort zones and exploring some of these things. It's still very safe to explore outside the parameters that we self-imposed in business marketing, I think.
Ryanair's my favorite. It's the best Twitter account in the world.
Yeah, and there's a great one in the US. I can't remember what department it is. It's a US federal agency or something. There's the, you know, the one I mean, right? It's the,
Did it do the Taco Bell one?
Yeah, I think that might have been it. Yeah,
it's like the Delaware Water Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
And they're just very joking. They're very self-referential. Now they do a very serious thing, but that's their persona. That's their personality. And I think as long as if you're going to do something, you should do it. You should really lean into it, right? I think where it doesn't work is if you say we're going to put on a quirky personality, but we're not really going to buy into it because we think it's a bit silly ourselves. But people pick up on that and they think, yeah, that's a bit naff and a bit you're trying too hard, right? So it's like work out who you are as a business, work out who your customers are, your audience is, and then create that persona that you think will work for you and for them, and then just go for it, like lean into it 100%.
But you need to somehow get the other members of staff to also really buy into it or think that it's authentic, because otherwise any writing that they put out will be so totally different from what the Twitter account puts out that it'll be kind of clashing.
Yeah, I think it needs to be, it has to be a top-down approach. And I think from a comms perspective, whoever the chief comms officer is, it has to be a default yes, as opposed to a default no with these things. And Formula One, again, big fan, they've changed. And a lot of the brands have changed, that they were very stiff, like formal, we came first or we came second, as I think they've given freedom to say, have some fun, let's try it. Obviously, don't push it too hard, but it's definitely a top down of, you can say something a bit edgy, get approval first, but
like show personality and and be a bit provocative sometimes, because that's what engages audience. Like we as audiences are engaged when we see something that subverts our expectations, right? So if we've got a big serious business and they're writing in a slightly quirky way, we're thinking, oh, okay, well, that's a bit interesting, it's a bit different. What we're expecting is the bland, sterile, corporate, normal way of doing things, try not to swear. So give them something that they're not expecting. And, and one of the other challenges we have, particularly us as a business, is that because we are, we're a law firm, we have partners, we have a very, decentralized process. We've got lots of different individual voices, many thousands of voices, all producing copy and messaging, which invariably is never all going to be perfectly aligned, because that's just the kind of business that we are. Versus if you have a consumer company and you've got, like, I don't know, a bottle and you're putting a label on it, then you get very tight control, right, over what goes on the label on that bottle. So something that we've been looking at is, so we've developed our tone of voice for our brand, and something that works for the kind of business that we are, but that tone of voice might not work for, a very consumer brand that's got that very tight control.
Yeah, and it can go wrong for consumer brands as well. Like, remember the various controversies around the Oatly brand, that oat milk brand that had a very, very twee, shall I say, tone of voice. And then they got into trouble for, they were very, very, very informal, very kind of, I'm your mate. And then they turned out to be doing all sorts of nasty things. And, the clash between what they were putting on their bottle, which was, as you say, funneled through one particular channel, and then what they were actually doing was obviously far different. Yeah,
and particularly that, businesses, it should have always been this case, but perhaps hasn't been. But, with ESG, businesses have to, walk the walk. They have to be credible and doing what they, are sort of pushing out on their sort of channels. So I think there is, things to be mindful of there when it comes to that kind of risk to the brand, that all B2B organizations do need to be mindful of.
Obviously, other publications get this, do it quite well. I think the Financial Times has extremely good, very readable. I think actually the the news on just general stuff in the Financial Times is really, really readable and well digested and short. And
the FT and the Economist do that really well. Like, you'd think that, if I asked my mum, she'd be like, Financial Times, that sounds like a lot of work. But actually, they, it's like the best headline writers are, at the Sun and places like that, right? They're really good at writing those short, snappy headlines. It's much harder to write in a very succinct way than it is to write in a very long-winded way. And that's something that we also see, is that, I'm a big believer in putting some kind of limits on creativity, in the sense of you channel that creativity. And, if you've got like a big Hollywood blockbuster, right, and you've got like $500 million to spend on it, it could turn out brilliantly. It might be a mess because you could do anything you wanted, right? Whereas if you've got a low budget horror film, you know where your parameters, right? You've got to be creative. You've got to force it to work, within the limits that you've got on you. And then I think that can also apply to the creative process in B2B marketing, when we're thinking about what can we do given we've got finite budgets, finite resources. How can we be creative within those? Because there's still room to do that. It doesn't all have to be, levels of spending. You can still do this stuff effectively.
Yeah, and I think understanding your audience, your customers or prospects, is one of the most important things to be creative. Right, and this B2C has been always really effective of using all the technology available to understand your audience. Elliot, perhaps you working in an agency, you must see a lot of trends in technology advancements. So is always B2B lagging behind? You mentioned something at the beginning that is not always the case, but how can we can get the most out of the tools that originally maybe were made for B2C marketing?
Ultimately, it's the data play, and I feel that no matter what, it's tools like you guys have is using data in a clever way to make informed decisions, as at the moment it's just Meta and Google ingesting everything and then basically making the decisions for you. As the technology for B2B, I think I haven't seen any used yet, because I think these are all very fearful based businesses in general. They don't want to try something that's a bit scary. But yeah, I think particularly with this AI stuff, they're going to be using more of these tools to pre-test ideas. One of the examples is, what was the link to it? It's called roundtable.ai. It basically, because all these AI tools have read the internet, instead of commissioning a $50,000 survey with Kantar to do all this, blah, 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 or like having a professional survey company come in, it's a survey company, but it's just asking the AI. So you ask it in the frame of, I am this business, here is my B2B customer, and you preface the AI with this, and then you just ask your customer survey. And they've done a whole bunch.
Someone would say, or predict what 50,000 people are going to say.
Exactly. Because it's already read the whole internet. It's already read your website. It knows exactly what you're like. It's every review, every blog post about it. And it's not perfect, but they've done a whole bunch of studies on it. And they're like, yeah, it's pretty accurate that, look, you're never going to get 50 results from actual customers, but we can have a pretty good idea if you just use this.
Wow. Yeah, I also wanted to ask you something about, there is some buzz around Google and Meta making significant changes in how we operate.
So I've got the clickbaity, salacious answer, and then I've got the slightly more sensible answer. So the clickbaity one of, ultimately the question is why are Meta and Google taking away our audience targeting capabilities and our asset selection capabilities or creative selection capabilities? The clickbaity answer is because we suck at our job. Like, I don't know about you guys. I can't say which brand. One of our internal clients had an ad for a big campaign coming up, and they pre-tested it with one of these very expensive pre-testings. They had single-digit percentage approval rating for the ad, which means out of 100, less than 10 people said, I liked this ad, it was enjoyable. And I'm like, guys, you have unlimited budgets. And all along, I know we say B2C does great ads. I'm like, no, I think we see thousands of ads in a week, but maybe 2 or 3 stand out. You go, oh, that was clever. Like a Specsavers one, for example. In general, it's Google's going, guys, we've been begging you and trying and doing all these trainings to give you all this budget to make good ads. We just never have. That's on the actual creative side. On the audience side, I think it's a twofold piece of no matter what business you are, even if you're Louis Vuitton or Apple, at most, you probably represent 5% of your consumers' total spending, excluding housing, because that's ridiculous. So it's like, even if you're the most in-depth, your supermarket, but at most, you may be getting 5-10% of their total spending. As Google and Meta have, I would hypothesize, probably a 50% view of every single dollar you spend, whether you're using Apple Pay, Google Pay, all of the websites you're on there, Pixel. So they just by default can create a better targeting list because they're not actually creating a targeting list of people that are into cycling and rugby and golf. They're going, no, we have seen who's bought your products. We've created a Venn diagram of all the other companies, and we're just going to show it to them. We don't care if they're into cycling, golf, or rugby. We're into people who are likely going to buy your thing.
Yeah. So no matter how many roundtable.ai's or however many surveys that Apple or Nike or whatever do, as you say, they just don't have the data that the ad platform does. Yeah.
That's it. And I actually think it's great. It's like with all this AI stuff, I've said to myself, it's like my job is to make myself redundant because that's how you get promoted. If someone else does it, aka Google and Apple, you get fired. So it's massively going to change. And for me, because the ad's my favorite part, all of these studies from LinkedIn, Meta, Google, all this stuff, they all say between 50 and 60% of the performance of a campaign is the ad itself, not the targeting and the media and the frequency and the reach. It's like, guys, just make better ads, but they don't know how to do it. Brands don't know how to do it. So Google and Apple have just said, bugger it, we're just going to do it for you. And they will, and it'll be amazing. Like all these Mid-Journeys and Chat GPTs, the ads are going to be phenomenal.
Yeah.
Sorry to all creative departments out there. You are losing your jobs.
Yeah, and then how you interlink that with the brand, right? Because you need to do it in the right tone of voice and everything.
Because it could be, you might create, like in some ways, you don't want it just to be brilliant. You also want it to be unique and consistent. Like you would accept worse ads if they were consistent, because if they're all brilliant but all totally different, then they're not going to associate. They're just going to really enjoy the ads as little bits of media or whatever. But
and I think it'll be a case by case basis, because it started in Google Ads, for example. They took away, you can put headline 1, headline 2, headline 3. Now you just have to upload up to 15 headlines and it will shuffle the order and figure it out. That was step 1. Now they're going, oh, we're just actually going to write the ad for you based on your website. And now we're at step 3, which is we're actually just going to write whatever gets you customers. And they utilize the website and they've put it through all these safety filters, obviously. But ultimately, I kind of feel that the people who create it from the get-go are going to impact what the AI ends up creating. Now, that may be a human presently, but I have a feeling the computers and AI are going to be making the brand vision and messaging. So therefore, the AIs are going to feed off themselves, basically.
I wonder if they will get to a point, though, where, because at the moment, not everything is AI, right? So we're in the phase where it's taking off, massively, and we and lots of other businesses are sort of exploring, like the possibilities with it, with the technology. But I wonder if just how, like vinyl made a big comeback, we'll go through a phase of people will start using AI and then it'll be everywhere. And then we'll be in a point, probably, not my organization, but, generally speaking, where we can be reasonably confident that most things that we see are AI produced in one way or another. And I wonder if there will come to a point then where there is a sort of almost maybe a backlash, but a point where businesses will be able to start differentiating themselves by not using AI.
Yeah, sure.
I 100% agree. I think it'll be like a shoe cobbler or a tailor-made suit or a really great bartender. The reason you're going isn't because it's the best, it's because of the human feel and touch.
Experience, right?
Yeah. And I think you're totally right. And I guess better time than ever, my favorite B2B out of the year. It's these Twitter bros that have like the guy mafia, they're calling themselves, is the private equity guy, the self-storage guy, the car dealership guy. And my favorite ad of the year has been this, they do staff outsourcing to the Philippines and LATAM, and average pay is about $5 an hour. And they've been paying all of these guy mafia Twitter people to just talk to their audience, which skews to business owners and SME operators. And they're just like, I love paying $5 an hour for my staff. It's such a good feeling. I save so much money. And they like, it's to rile the audience up a bit. And this one guy with 300,000 followers, his name's Nick Huber, he makes about $50,000 to $7,000 a month in referral fees alone from making 1 or 2 tweets a week, like riling up his audience with, oh, I love paying $5 an hour. It's so much better than $40 an hour in America. And that to me is the best B2B play of the year. And so much so, he actually approached them and said, I'm going to create a competitor to you. Give me a piece of equity. And they said, okay, here's the equity. Please keep tweeting. And so he now owns a piece of the business because it was so successful.
It's just too successful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's
again, you can't do that for every business.
No, but it's that point again, isn't it? It's by sort of, there will always be that human ingenuity, you know, to think of, you know, I don't know enough about AI to know at what point we may transition to having, you know, a true, you know, or what they call a genuine artificial intelligence, but we aren't there yet. And as far as I've seen, I don't, you know, haven't seen a credible, you know, it's like we've got these huge large language models, but they don't know anything, you know, like then they say that the, you know, like they talk about, you know, the computer beating Gary Kasparov, you know, years ago, the deep blue computer. Well, it doesn't know it's beating Gary Kasparov. It doesn't even know it's playing against Gary Kasparov. It doesn't even know that the thing it's playing is chess, really. So these language models are good at telling us what the next letter is. And, you know, that's all that they're doing is like, what's the next letter? What's the best next letter to give the, you know, to the user on the prompt? So if we do ever get a genuine, you know, AI that can actually think in the same way as a human and be creative, then you could see it could come up with those kind of ideas. But
I think it's still going to be, it's still going to have a, you know, it's still going to have a tendency to kind of go to the common denominator. That's what, you know, a lot of ChatGPT necessarily, because it's trained on so much. The best is probably somewhere in the middle. So the ads are likely to come up to a level. You know, there's a lot of very bad ads, as you say, Elliot, in B2C right now and in B2B as well. But perhaps it could bring it up to a certain level. But maybe in B2B especially, because you're likely to have to give the algorithm specific information to overwhelm. Because in B2B, you often speak with an audience that's quite niche. You know, might even just be a few hundred people. So you still want to make ads though. So, but you'd have to train it with enough information that it's sort of counterbalanced all the other information that might be bringing it down to a common denominator. You want to speak in a certain language that you kind of know about. So maybe especially in B2B, it might be still worth putting a lot more training data into the AI, at least for a lot longer.
Yeah, I think there's already these tools, and basically they just ingest every single email, every single piece of comms you've had with a person, and you can plug in their social media and everything. So you can know if I was speaking to Tom versus John versus Colm, the tone of my emails would change to make sure that I'm communicating in the way you want to be communicated with. Because it's, I don't know where it was. It was basically, we want to see people that are like us, sound like us, and behave like us in general. It's like, you want people that you're like, huh, that's cool. I like that. And ultimately, that's just, it's going to start doing this mimic thing. I don't necessarily think it's right or wrong. I just think it is, and it's going to be utilized by companies if it makes more money.
So are you saying in 5 years' time, we're going to have 5 different variations of an ad all targeted towards your type of personality on TV?
I think they're going to be way more detailed than that. I have a feeling it will be pure one-to-one messaging, because Meta and Google are going to be creating the ad. So they'll know that I've seen Nike, Rolex, and Formula One. They'll go, cool, we need to create an ad copy that's relevant to that person, as opposed to Barbie, Oppenheimer, and Apple. And they'll go, great, we're going to make this.
And that's where it's like transformative, right? Because if you've got that level of user data, it would be prohibitively time consuming and expensive for humans to produce a bespoke ad for each one of those consumers. So it's not just that the AI can do it at all, it's that, you know, it's not that they can just come up with the ideas, it's that they can actually execute that on such a huge scale for people.
And coming back to today's topic, do you see in the use of this technology a big difference between B2B and B2C in the past, and what do you expect for in the future?
I think behind the scenes, you guys may have seen B2B does it first, but they keep it very quiet, because B2B it's a pure marketplace. It's, you know, like most of your thing isn't done because of brand power. It's because of offering and position and relationships. So it's, for example, I think it was Goldman Sachs. They've already put $1 billion in to train their own AI. We were talking internally at Publicis, don't know if this is public, bleep it out if it's not, to putting like $5 million to do something. And I'm like, guys, you're playing on completely different scales here. So I think B2C does exist, but it's more vocal. As B2B, again, I could be wrong behind the scenes. I have a feeling they're doing way more.
There's more trialing done behind the scenes on the B2B side.
As they're very public with B2C of like, oh, we're trying this new AI filter thing that's going to make your shoe fitting more like a better experience. As we might figure out that actually, no, these guys have built a completely different tool on the B2B side.
There's also that sort of, you know, there would be a resistance in some ways, right? So if you go onto a, you know, like a corporate website and there's a chat bot, you know, I don't really want to use the chat bot that much, you know, even if it's really, really good. I probably don't want to do it. Like when I'm in the supermarket, I don't really want to check out my own stuff because, you know, I don't work there. That's just me, right? So I'd rather a human was paid for that and I didn't have to pack my own stuff. I think that's a relatively reasonable value proposition. So I do think there's going to be, you know, just like you have like the uncanny valley in sort of AI and sort of CGI, right? Where now we can kind of almost make photorealistic, you know, people, you know, using computer generated, but there was a bit where it was quite uncanny and weird and a bit freaky. There is that resistance, isn't there, on the part of anyone, whether they're a consumer or a business customer, to something that they know has been, if they know, of course, it's been generated by an AI, by a computer program, rather than actual human investment. And I imagine that would probably play into, you know, you think of it at a different level. If you were a B2B organization with pitching documents, right? You were pitching to a client and the client could tell that was just a template and you've just changed a few things on it. That might make them feel less positive about that experience and that interaction. So it's just
the audiences tend to be older. So it might be that level of preference retain, you know, stays for longer in B2B. But actually in B2C, there are certain brands that actually are totally upfront about it. And for a certain audience, perhaps a younger audience, they lean into it and just like, yeah, all our celebrities, all our spokespeople, all our content, everything is AI.
It's like some people, you know, I guess, you know, I don't know if this is strictly a generational thing, but you see it with like emojis, right? Like, you know, some people like emojis, some people don't. And maybe that's partly tied to, you know, age and generation. I don't know. But it's like we all as humans, I find that more interesting is or just as interesting as where AI goes is what are our responses to where AI is going to be as humans, as consumers, as audiences, right? Because we can't guess that, right? We might be able to say, okay, we're engineering this AI to do these certain things. How will humans respond to what that AI does is, I think, less knowable.
I think there are always going to be traditionalists out there, and they could be high-earning traditionalists as well. So they will be non-AI fans, let's say, like this. So it's the same way. If books have not disappeared over thousands of years, nor are they going to, and that's traditionalist element too. So even if this AI becomes dominant, I still think you should never ignore the traditionalists because they'll always be there.
Agreed.
I think events are very powerful in B2B. I mean, at least they used to be, you know, extremely well used compared to B2C, where it's really expensive, really massive scale if you want to do an event that makes any difference. In B2B, often quite a lot of deals are done between people. And I spoke with a lot of people during COVID who predicted a massive resurgence of in-person events in B2B. I mean, have you guys seen that? Have you seen people really investing in really high quality experiential B2B events? Because I haven't.
Got the classics, the golf days, and they're ramping right back up. And I've got to go to a couple, and the new business I'm joining as well, they do, I think, at least one big one every 6 months where they invite their 30 most valuable clients. And that's technically B2B because it's B2B to C. And so it's quite a traditional behavior set.
To B.
Yeah. It's quite a traditional behavior set of gather a whole bunch of people around, have some breakfast, play some golf, chit chat, and hopefully some deals get done. And also, I think it's the measurement piece is B2C has been obsessed with incrementality and attribution modeling and viewability and all these things. As B2B's kind of just gone, well, I'm going to spend 100 grand on this event. Yeah, we're probably going to make it back in 18 months. And they're just like, okay with that, as which is actually on the flip side of in the advertising world, they seem to be very strict of if I'm going to spend this $10,000 on sponsoring a newsletter, I want to see at least that much come back in a trackable format. But on the events, I don't know, you guys, I think it's just so hard to convince a CFO to sign off on $100,000 when it's like, we could just jump on Zoom. It's like, yeah, but it's different.
I guess I'm not in events, but I guess the pandemic had an effect on all of that. Obviously, with I guess it's similar to like the working from home thing, right? It's like it hasn't gone back to how it was before in quite the same way, right? So these, although it didn't just bounce back, and maybe events have been changed by that too in the in-person side of things.
Well, I think the reason we're here talking about this.
Didn't a certain company announce that they want everybody back in the office yesterday or the day before?
It was a good headline. That was I enjoyed that headline. That was, you could tell that they the writers enjoyed that.
Interestingly, my experience with events was while working for Casillero del Diablo. The wine brand sponsors Manchester United. Okay, and it's a millionaire. It's quite an expensive sponsorship, but if you live in the UK, it's really rare to see any relationship between the two brands, and it's because of how they use Manchester United is for a B2B relationship, is to invite clients to so they have the Old Trafford once a year entirely for the brand. You can invite
the Tesco's wine buyer.
Exactly, and in some regions they use it for B2C and run ads on TV, etc. But in most of the countries was purely for a B2B relationship. So I think that's a good proof of how important are events in B2B marketing.
I didn't know that. I often see with football clubs they've got like official waffle partner, for the football club or something. And you're like, what's that? What the waffle's got to do with that sports team? But the way you've explained it there does make sense. So now I'll look at those in a different way.
From a research side of points, a lot of those partnerships don't have a lot to do with selling end product. It's usually formed as a non-rejection strategy of they sponsor the big, famous, shiny thing that everyone knows about and has a lot of brand equity. Yeah. So that, let's say, insurance company, for example, they sponsor Man U or whoever it is. So when you're going to renew your car insurance, you're going to review all 10 companies when you go to one of the aggregators. The sole purpose of that ad is to make sure that you don't immediately disregard them. You go, oh, I think I've seen them on Man U. Cool, I'll consider them.
So you don't so you're not ruling them out immediately. Yeah. You think there's something there deep in my brain that's like, they've got some of that reflected glory from that bigger brand equity that they've been associated with. It's just a trust
thing, I think. It's if they can afford to sponsor Man U, they're probably a real business. As I think when you're making even a wine purchase, you're like, well, if they can support Man U, probably got a good facility to make wine. I'll buy that.
Yeah, so to try. In some ways, the quality of the ads sometimes doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it could be the shittiest way of presenting it, but you're simply saying, I have a lot of money, and therefore you should take me seriously.
Yeah, it's interesting, because obviously I work in professional services, sort of a line of work. I'm not in a consumer organization, so understanding our customers, can be a bit harder. And like you said, that there can be more than, can be different reasons as to why one bit of messaging or one advert could work, for a customer. And sometimes it is more complex and sometimes it is more simple. And that's another variable that you have to factor in, which is, when I'm certainly thinking, when we're thinking about messaging here at our firm is, okay, but what's the purpose of what we're trying to do here? Whether or not we can measure it, like what's the intent behind it? And I'm a big, as obviously I would say, because I'm a writer, but I'm a big believer in that sort of authorial intent and not trying to please everyone. Like things done by committee don't really end, usually that brilliantly. It's when you've got that clear purpose and approach, and then you lean into that. I think those things tend to be more successful.
I actually think the way that Joaquin, you described it, that Castillo has done things is actually quite smart, because that's what I would actually look to do in different markets if I were them.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see the rationale for doing that.
Yeah, and same thing in Asia. If you want to enter a country that is totally different, and you need to build relationships with distributors, finally making these kind of partnerships are really helpful. And yeah, we used to sponsor the Masters of Golf in Shanghai. You mentioned golf before, Elliot. Yeah, that's the reason. You need to spend time with your clients in an event talking about something that is different of what you usually talk.
Yeah, and it definitely applies to B2B, especially if you were saying at the beginning, like quite a lot of B2B is about, Elliot, you were saying non-rejection in B2B is kind of trying to minimize the risk that I'll get fired for doing this. And so,
yeah. And I think that goes even further, right? Which is that sometimes people in B2B, that they're like, well, they might be scared of doing something, not necessarily even because they think it might get them fired, but because it just hasn't been done before here. And they just think, well, like safety is just doing the same thing that we did before because no one got in trouble for that, right? And but sometimes you're going to look and say, well, if a business is producing something and it's getting, I don't know, like 10% engagement or something or whatever, you've not got a lot to lose by doing something differently, right? If you're at like 80%, you've got a lot to lose by going crazy with it. Yeah. So
there's a kind of a tipping point, isn't there? With a brand that's big enough like Kellogg's, you absolutely don't
rock it too much.
But if you're Surreal, that kind of new cereal brand,
always, even if you're Kellogg's, always be trying, even if it's only 5% of your budget spent, to try something new all the time. Otherwise, you're not going to evolve the brand.
That's a good point. Also, I find it interesting to think about, are we only concerned about maximum efficiency, right? So is that only late stage capitalism will probably say yes, that's what we're concerned with here, is maximum efficiency, maximum return on investment, maximizing all of those things, and that the art and the poetry and that human experience, it all must be subservient to the end that we're trying to achieve. So the difference between like a marketing brochure and a novel, right? The novel is not about efficiency, it's about that experience, that qualia that we have as humans in our, subjective experience of different things. Like we experience the color green in different ways, right? All of that what makes us human. And I hope that we're not heading for a place where with AI that it just is maximum efficiency and there's no room for that kind of subjective experience, that poetry, that art, that entertainment, that the stuff that we respond to and need as human beings throughout our lives, throughout the existence of humankind. We've always needed the arts, we've always needed that creativity there. It's not just about making money.
I like to think, sorry, you go, Joachim.
Thank you. We draw the parallel before with the luxury industry. The luxury industry is full of small details in the choice, in the role of key opinion leaders. Colm, you have experience with that. I don't want to miss the opportunity of talking about that because I think it's really interesting that the connection between B2B and other industries to learn from, like the luxury industry.
An interesting thing about the luxury companies I've done work with, some of them were just very fixated on looking at other luxury companies and seeing what they're doing, which I think is a mistake. You should always,
Yeah.
you should always, even if I take the example, John, of let's say a legal company that's doing something really interesting, why shouldn't a big luxury brand also look to that? Because otherwise they're going to end up doing the similar things to, let's say, I'll take to example, say Gucci and Louis Vuitton are doing something exactly the same, and they're only looking at each other. Sometimes, and I've also worked in that industry, similar in that way. You could have cost looking exactly where competitors are looking at.
I think we're losing you, Colm. I'm so sorry.
Colm?
Just like luxury, leaves us wanting more.
Yeah. Sorry, we lost you for a second. Connection.
Yeah.
Elliot, sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to mention something.
I was wanting to add to John's point about totally right of maximum efficiency versus the art. And I feel the art has a massively undervalued long tail. It's thinking like a Mr. Beast video. Yes, it gets 100 million views and sells $10 million worth of chocolate, but that's a one-off, as opposed to think of the small vloggers or content creators that you follow, and you build a genuine one-to-one parasocial relationship with that person where you actually think you're their friend, even though they've no idea who you are. Yeah. And I feel if there's any takeaway, which I think we can all agree on, is like B2B companies need to make more content, and real content, not here's my widget, it has 6 gadgets and it can do this for your business. It's like, no, we get that. That's assumed. We're doing a tender process. Why should we engage with you? What is the experience or the fun or anything? I always call it I got it from the CTO of HubSpot. I forget his name. The LPMs, the laughs per minute in his presentations, and Damesh, that's the gentleman's name. And I think the beauty side of things, particularly with the Twitter examples, these people have 50, 100,000 followers. They're now making $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year from being genuine. And ultimately, I think being genuine is going to make way more money than min-maxing your efficiencies.
I mean, it has worked for, again, I go back to luxury, but in the 70s, 80s, there was the quartz crisis where Swiss watchmakers suddenly had a panic. And obviously the quartz crystal is absolutely better. Like, it's just better. It's way more accurate, it's far lighter, much thinner. It's a bit like AI. It's, clearly so much faster, so much more accurate, never makes grammatical or spelling mistakes. Like, it's better than hiring a grad to write something for you. But then in the 2000s, and you would have thought that all these, luxury makers, except Rolex, would have gone out of business, but they kind of came back, and they're now clockwork is actually deliberately sought out, and not nobody wants a quartz watch, of course. They're mostly still quartz, but there's huge demand for clockwork and tourbillons and all these kind of weird stuff that's really hard to predict. So it's
like the Maya Angelou quote, isn't it? It's like people remember how they made you feel, right? That's how what you remember of those relationships, of those experiences. And the enemy of that is, I guess, disposable consumerism, right? Where it's just a thing that you throw away, whether that's content, whether that's a t-shirt that's been made for like 2 pence, somewhere where someone's being exploited. What do we value? What's important in life? Even in a capitalist society, we still value the experience, rather than just the efficiency. I think our lives would all be poorer if everything was done super efficiently, but there was no connection with the people providing those goods and services. So I think
there's definitely a niche there for a B2B, especially brand, to completely deliberately reject AI generated content and do stuff that somehow, I don't know how you do this, but it's obviously human, maybe in-person events,
Exactly. Well, I just realized we are coming to an end of our time. Thank you so much for your collaboration today. It's been a great conversation. We will be in touch in the upcoming weeks. I just realized we had some questions from our audience, because we were streaming this on LinkedIn and YouTube. and we didn't have time to answer those questions. So I will post these questions in an email later and see if you could help us answering them. Okay, so we can give them answers.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
You.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thanks,
See you.
Colin. Thanks, Elliot.